I realize this may seem like a strange comparison, with the GoPro Max being a 360 camera and the Osmo Pocket more of a pocket cinema tool. However, the premise of each is that they provide you with unique shots that you simply cannot get with a traditional point and shoot or DSLR. In comparing the specs for both of these, we see that the GoPro Max shoots in 360 at 5.6K and up to 1440 in hero mode. It's using electronic image stabilization and has a range of different photo, video, and time-lapse options. The Osmo Pocket shoots in up to 4K 60 and uses a mechanical image stabilization, as well as including several unique photo and video time-lapse options. So let's take a quick look at the video comparison between the GoPro Max footage and the Osmo Pocket. And right off the bat, you're going to see a huge difference in the field of view, and you'll also notice a difference in the color science behind each one of these two cameras. Once again, we can see a pretty substantial difference in the field of view between the two cameras. In this shot, we can see a little bit of struggle that the Osmo Pocket has in terms of finding its initial focus. And that's an important item to bring up, is that in the GoPro Max, we're looking at an infinity focus. On the Osmo Pocket, you can get that depth effect if that's what you desire. Looking at the Spaceship Earth ride, you can see that the prisms are significantly more detailed, especially here. If you look at the trees at the base, there's a lot more detail on the Osmo Pocket than there is in the GoPro Max, although you're able to get substantially more of it into the shot in the GoPro Max. And in this case, I could not have simply just backed up as there was a wall behind me. So as it turns out, I wasn't actually intending to compare these two in the evening. I wanted to get here when it was a little bit lighter, but with the time change, this is what I ended up with. And it ended up being a great opportunity to look at the difference between the two cameras and compare that electronic versus the mechanical stabilization. In some of these shots, before it gets really dark, I actually really liked the image out of the GoPro Max. I was surprised at how much better it did in terms of exposing the full shot. Although both of them struggle with exposing the light source in the background, at least in the GoPro Max you can see the footage a little clearer. At this point in the night, there was still a little bit of natural daylight. You can see the GoPro Max is starting to struggle compared to the Osmo Pocket. This next shot gives us a great look at the difference in the color science between these two cameras, with the GoPro Max giving off a rather yellow tint to it, whereas the Osmo Pocket is much cooler. Now, in terms of what it actually was like in real life at that moment in time, I'd definitely give the win the Osmo Pocket. It's much more true to life in terms of the colors, and if anything, I think that I could have just bumped up the brightness a little bit on the Osmo Pocket during some of its underexposed shots, where I would have had to have done a lot more work with the GoPro Max. Here's another look at that same shot, giving you kind of a full screen view of that GoPro Max, which again is not a bad image, and some people might actually prefer it. It just doesn't represent what the actual image looked like to me at that same time. As the evening progresses and it begins to get darker, you can see that the electronic image stabilization of the GoPro Max just doesn't hold up very well, especially compared to the Osmo Pocket. The Osmo Pocket produces an image that's stable and sharp enough to be able to read the signs in the background, whereas the GoPro Max is borderline unusable at this time in the evening. When you're not moving the camera and you're just doing some simple panning, the GoPro Max produces a decent image, and it does give you that nice field of view. You can see that the Osmo Pocket is significantly more cropped in, but it's definitely a sharper image, especially if we do a direct comparison between the two. You notice that the Osmo Pocket is significantly brighter in image. And coming up, we'll go ahead and do a 200% crop on this, just to give you an idea of just how pixelated the GoPro Max is in this same exact field of view. Here's a quick look at the difference between the time-lapse features on both of the cameras. Notice that the Osmo Pocket is much more stable and the image is much sharper. At this point in the evening, the sun had almost set, and as the monorail goes by in the background, you can see that with these lighting conditions, both of these cameras are going to produce a substantial amount of noise in the background, at least at their default settings. In the next couple of scenes, you're going to see some mixed lighting conditions, starting with just an overall comparison of how they handle background lighting. You can see that the Osmo Pocket, again, is a much sharper, clearer image, thanks in part to its mechanical image stabilization. You'll also notice that the GoPro Max on the left is giving off a ton of light, flare. I think this may deal with a slight smudge on the lens of the GoPro Max, but realize that that's something that you'll have to deal with. If you don't keep those lenses particularly clean, this is the kind of impact that you can get as a result. As we walk past the UK pavilion, you can see that it is completely dark at this point in the evening. The Osmo Pocket is still maintaining some of its colors. It's still staying relatively stable. I think that by this point, there's no competition between the electronic image stabilization and the Osmo Pocket, at least in nighttime footage. So we'll go ahead and switch things up, and I'll give you a quick test of both the image and the audio that you can expect from both of these cameras. And here's that exact same shot from the Osmo Pocket. As we head further into the France Pavilion, you get an opportunity to see how each of these cameras adjusts to the different lighting situations as we kind of pan around between the fountains on our right, and we'll pan over to the restaurant on our left. As we head into the bakery in the French Pavilion, you'll get a good sample of how each one of these cameras handles the transition from an outdoor evening setting to an indoor artificial lighting setting. One of the things that's really surprised me with the GoPro Max is just how long it takes for that electronic image stabilization to correct itself. In this particular scene, it never really fully adjusted to the change in the lighting situations. Now we'll take a look at some extreme lighting situations. This one is in the Americas Pavilion, and this is just hand holding both cameras, trying to be as steady as I possibly could. From here we'll head over to the Japan Pavilion, and we'll take a look at some of the buildings and some of the walkways in the evening time. These give you a few more excellent examples of the difference between that electronic and mechanical image stabilization as we move around. Again, I'm very impressed with the overall colors and stability of the Osmo Pocket under almost all of these lighting conditions, especially considering the small sensor size. Now, of course, this wouldn't hold up to something like a Sony a7 III or even an a6400 with a decent wide aperture lens, but it's doing fairly well. I feel like most of these shots would be relatively usable on the Osmo Pocket, whereas on the GoPro Max, I really wouldn't feel comfortable using any of this footage. Heading through the UK Pavilion, here's one more example of the comparison between the time-lapse footage of the GoPro Max and the Osmo Pocket. They both did a really decent job considering how dimly lit it was at the time. Now up through this point in the video, almost all the footage that I've shown, except for the very first scene, has been the GoPro Max in the hero mode. So I wanted to give you an example of what it looks like when you use the 360 images and then you reframe them after the fact. And here's a comparison using that exact same shot, comparing it directly against the Osmo Pocket. Here's one final comparison between the GoPro reframed footage compared to the Osmo Pocket. As we walk past the Canada Pavilion, you can see some of the different angles that were viewable between the two. One of the single biggest advantages of the GoPro footage is being able to reframe the image after the fact. And that was nice, as I didn't really have to worry about the direction the camera was pointed or what was taking place around me. If I wasn't simultaneously trying to film with the Osmo Pocket, it would have definitely allowed me to be more immersed in my surroundings at the time. If all that I had with me that night was the Osmo Pocket, I would have completely missed this lady with the stroller just totally breaking it down here at the Canada Pavilion to this folk music. Now look, I realize that up until this point in the video, a lot of this comparison hasn't really been fair to the GoPro Max, as it's simply not designed to be used as a nighttime device for walking around in low light conditions. So I wanted to take a look at some of its unique benefits in this last segment, including the time warp function, which I see as one of the greatest strengths of this camera. It would be extremely difficult to replicate this footage with almost any other camera without a ton of post-processing. And if you're anything like me, you hardly ever get to be in any of your footage, whereas when filming in 360, you always have that option. So if you do end up getting the GoPro Max for any number of reasons, one of the critical things that you have to understand is the amount of time and effort that goes into reframing 360 footage after it's been shot. Unlike a traditional camera where you get a video file that's compatible with just about any type of video editing software, when shooting in 360, you'll either need to use the GoPro app on your phone or download the footage from the SD card on your computer and either use GoPro's software or a plugin for Adobe Premiere. Now, I'm currently using Final Cut Pro, and at the time of this video's posting, they do not yet have a plugin available. I chose to do all of my edits on the phone as I found the computer to take significantly longer to process, and setting keyframes was just not as intuitive. Now, as someone who's also used the Insta360 One X for 360 footage, I'll have to say that the GoPro app missed one key element from Insta360, which is the ability to record keyframes as you physically move your phone in order to capture your final shots. And you'll also need to consider that once you have completed keyframing, it will take some time to download depending upon the length of the media. In my case, I found that it was on average about twice the amount of time to export as the length of the video. In my final shot of the night, you can see the results of the keyframing that we just did in the GoPro app compared with the footage that I got in real time with the Osmo Pocket. I think depending upon your personal needs, the GoPro could either be a great tool for composing some unique shots or a huge burden when it comes to creating a video without a significant amount of post-processing effort on your part. At the end of the day, if you're someone who is planning on using this primarily in the regular hero mode as a replacement for a more traditional GoPro, I simply can't recommend it against more traditional action cameras like the GoPro Hero 8 or the Osmo Action, and especially the Osmo Pocket for the superior low-light stabilized images. I do realize this was not an apples-to-apples comparison, but I hope that it provided you with some understanding of the differences between the two different styles of cameras with their drastically different stabilization modes used under less than ideal lighting conditions. Most of the other videos I posted recently were shot almost entirely in the Osmo Pocket, with the exception of a recent test of the GoPro Max on the Thunder Mountain Railroad roller coaster at Magic Kingdom. Thanks for watching the video. Let me know if you'd like to see more sample footage of either of these two cameras in the comments below.